Hinduism. It's the birth of so many cool spiritual concepts, spiritual understandings. You don't need to subscribe to the religion in order to let the spiritual understandings emerge. And they had a long history. If you look at the beginning of Hinduism, Vedantism, which comes from the word Vedas, there were 4 Vedas, and the Rig Veda is the one that really deals with our own spiritual stuff. The others deal with rituals and all kinds of stuff like that. And the Rig Vedas basically said the whole gate, it's an illusion. The whole gate, it doesn't matter. And so what happened is those who understood were the brightest saw that it was an illusion and they left. So the society was losing its best minds based on the teaching that it was giving them, which is Maya. It's all illusion. Well, what happened is the best and the brightest would wander about and beg, but during the rainy season they would gather and they would share their wisdom. And eventually scribes began to write down that wisdom and they became the Upanishads. Well, out of all this teaching, the word illusion, Maya, kept morphing a little bit until we get the Mahabharata, of which the greatest one is the Bhagavad Gita, which talks about Dharma. Yes, it's an illusion, but it's all we have, and you can't escape unless you work through it. And so the word Dharma emerges with a deeper rootedness in the soul of the people. It's a Sanskrit word. It means to contain, but it's also come to mean other things, and we'll talk about that because it's evolved in ways that are quite interesting. There are 4 aspects to Hinduism. There's artha, which is your economic stability, your kama, which is your pleasure and love. And there's sutras for all of this. Most of us have heard of the Kama Sutra. And then there's moksha, which has to do with liberation and self-actualization. And then there's dharma. And dharma originally meant that you although it's difficult to find a single word, righteousness, merit, religious moral values. It was based on the caste system, basically saying you have a duty to be in accord with the universe and society. This was the truth of your fitting inness, if you will. And if you were a butcher, your dharma had to do with being a butcher. If you were a baker, same thing. If you are Arjuna, a prince, well, lead people into battle against those who you know are still part of you. You see, it's waking up to something greater. And if we look at the word, by the time Buddhism happens, the word Dharma or Dhamma becomes cosmic law and order. And in the Buddhist teaching, the Dhammapada, or Dhammapada, depending on who your teacher was, has to do with Dharma is truth and Pada is path. And the path of truth is Buddhist teaching. And the word set up camp in Jainism and Sikhism, but also referring to the teaching of the leader. And if you go online today and you look up listening to your Dharma, you'll find mostly Buddhist teachings. But as Dharma, as the definition evolved, so has it does it continue to do so in the West. And this is what I want us to understand because it's a wonderful term. Today, Dharma, path, truth. What is your personal Dharma? What is finding the truth and the waking to your truth, the truth that is you? See, that, in my mind, is the story of each of us. Listening to our Dharma is akin to listening to your heart. Campbell talked about following your bliss. And yeah, there's this thread. Now, my view, I have to say, finds its rootedness in Jungian psychology. Jung saw spirituality as the 5th function. Thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition were the 4 functions, but there was a meta-function of spirituality. Dharma, heart, authentic self. And once we start talking about authentic self within Jung's universe, we're talking about the totality of self. We're talking about psyche. Yet, most of psyche is unconscious. So we're back to the flits of insight and flits of consciousness, to our dreams, our free associations, the bits and pieces, along with our forward motion. That's where our inherent truth of being is. It's looking for a path into this world. That's what the psyche is all about. The totality of our being is looking for a way into the world, a dhammapata, a path of truth. That the totality of our consciousness can not just be in accord, but also manifest itself. Jung called this self-actualization. And we can see this, I think, especially some of us who are older, through the intent of our Dharma. Because if you look at your life, it pushes us in certain directions. And following this intent, to me, is the journey that is my life, that is your life, that is life itself, consciousness. This is what it's doing. And this is what those Hindus sitting around in the rainy season gathering and talking about all the things they've thought about, they were looking for an authentic totality of being and a purpose to be in accord with it. So, Dharma, it's a biggie in my mind. It's a word that has taken root in my spiritual universe, and I'm welcome. I'm very excited to be here with Bob Hayes, who's coming from Florida, Mary Ann Rudis, who's coming from Spokane Valley. I'm here in Spokane, Washington. Mary Ann, we missed you last week, so I'm going to let you go first. Listening to your Dharma.
Oh boy. Well, I think, one of the words that really stuck out for me that you mentioned was purpose. And so is following our Dharma, is that where we discover our purpose, or is our purpose our Dharma? And I mean, it's kind of like once we figure out who we are, it was interesting when you were talking a little bit about the history and the caste system and the idea that you were born into a certain way of life and then you were supposed to follow that life. Well, here I was raised with, you can be whoever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. And then it's kind of like, well, that means I don't have a predetermined purpose, that I have to figure out what that purpose is, find that Dharma, and then that is the only way to peace and to truth. And it's kind of like, but then it brings us back to what you were talking about Joseph Campbell, because as you were talking, I thought about, find your bliss. And so where does that come from? The idea of this is what I value. Is that part of that predetermined Dharma, and that's your path. So for me, it's quite a jumbled mess in my head. But I think that it's just, again, getting back to finding out who we are and discovering that and living from that place. To me, that's what I kind of think of with Dharma.
And sometimes our Dharma is to be living in a jumbled mess.
Well, yeah, been there. I'm living there.
Yeah, I'm still there, sister. Bob, listening to your Dharma.
I loved your little historical summary. That was very, very brief, but you captured, the essence of it. And I was telling you before we went on the air here that I'd gone back to some of my Indian philosophy textbooks and things like that. Tried to look back at Dharma and how it has changed. And it suddenly occurred to me that a big part of my Dharma is seeing patterns. And that led me to systems thinking and a lot of other different things. But I see the evolution of Dharma much like the evolution of different kinds of terms in every religion, where you start out, someone has a religious experience. We've talked about that in many different episodes, and then tries to translate that experience and explain it to others. And pretty soon that explanation evolves and you suddenly have an institution. And then that institution starts to impose rules upon the way people should behave. And that's how you enforce the caste system. And that's how you enforce virtually every kind of power dynamic that institution wants to maintain. But over the years, there's an arc that comes back to the original form, that original experience, that Dharma is unique to everyone. Everyone has their own unique path. And yeah, those rules can be imposed, but there's always this tension between what we experience intuitively and what is imposed upon us by society or by institutions. And that tension has always been there. And within myself, it's been there in trying to decide whether I was going to be a sociologist or a psychologist. Was I going to look at how institutions work to mold us into what we are? Or how does psyche act to mold us into what we are? And it's really both. So we're now moving, as we've said in a lot of different discussions we've had, we're moving to the point where everyone can become more aware of what their uniqueness brings to the game, to the dance. Let's choose a metaphor. And Dharma is a perfect example of how that evolution has happened. So that now we're looking for our unique place, our unique path, our unique purpose. And the other side of Dharma is righteousness or virtue or merit. And it's the outside looking in. If the outside sees what we're doing as an individual as meritorious, then they buy into it. But, again, there's always that tension.
Yeah.
And we got to remember that the institution is going to try and maintain its own power. So we got to be careful how we approach it.
Well, and now we're into the original meaning, which is to contain. Who's containing what? And how we do that. And, I think I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Tocqueville. He was an early reflector on democracy. And one of the big problems he saw with it is nobody knew their place. In other words, in England and in France, everybody knew you were born into a place and you knew it. And this was a new concept in the world back then. And he said this, what's going to happen when nobody knows their place? And I think that that's been a troubling aspect because it's been a challenge for society. Democracies live out loud, which makes it a lot more problematic than a royalty or a monarch or an autocrat or something like that. But I think, Bob, we are talking about our individual Dharma, our individual path of truth that is our most authentic self. And how do we not just live that, but manifest it? And I'll be honest, patterns is a good way of seeing it. Look back on your life and where did you show up? That'll tell you a lot about who you are and what your intent is. Now, I've shared with you doctors who should have been carpenters and, why'd you become a doctor? Well, my parents, they ended up following an intent that was not their own. And listening to our own intent is huge. That's why dreams, man, I'll tell you, I'm dreaming out loud now because I'm kind of stuck. My studio's down. I got too much stuff. It's going to cost me all this money to get upgraded. And I know, it's a lot of money. Am I worth it? All that stuff. But the fact is, I got to do something. There's something in me that I don't care how trite it is, that needs to be recording and writing songs and doing that. What the hell I do with it, I've never really known that. So I want us to talk a little bit about how do we listen to it? How do we hear it? Especially for our younger listeners, maybe who don't have enough life to see the patterns yet. Either of you?
I think something that came to my mind was sometimes life will show you where you're going to go, and it will step in, and you'll have that encounter that makes you wonder. And so I think exploring, not being afraid to explore, is key to trying to discover who we are and what it is that we want to, that is going to bring us to that place of being able to live authentically from ourself, and paying attention. I was just talking with someone and who just this happenstance thing happened to them and has led them on this new path that they're going down. And she was saying, how did that happen? How was it that this came into my consciousness right at this time? And then you just kind of start to walk down that road. Bob, you talked about trying to decide between being a psychologist or a sociologist. For me, when I was younger, all I knew was I wanted to just be a free spirit and hit the road and let life teach me what it had to teach me. And again, it brought me down some pretty interesting roads. But is there an intentionality that I missed? Or was that the intention? Like you said it before, sometimes we are just supposed to be a hot mess, right? So trying to be accepting of our choices and understanding that our choices happened for a reason. When we made a choice, we made that choice at that time for whatever reason we thought it was the right thing to do. I don't think, and so then where we end up is like, okay, I'm not really liking where I ended up, so where do I go from here? And open yourself up to a new choice and understanding that there is a way to make a new choice. Because I think what happens, like you were talking about the doctor who really didn't want to be a doctor, but did it because his family wanted him to. At some point, it's like, well, do I just stay in this forever? Or do I just decide that, I'm going to be a carpenter and stop? So I think it's an ongoing, lifelong process. And some of us figure it out earlier than others, I think. So.
Yeah. Or never figure it out, and that's just part of it too.
And a way of thinking about it is learning to ride the wave that is you. Each of us are generating all this stuff, and it rises up and it crests and it falls. And after you've watched a few waves of yourself crash on the shore, you go, oh, these are waves of me crashing on the shore, and you start seeing that there's a way to ride those aspects of yourself and let go of those that don't serve you, because the fact is they cause you to lose, here's Bob's word, balance. And the whole key is to become at home riding the waves of you. That doesn't mean again, some of those waves you're a hot mess. Some of them you're on top of the world. Things, they wane, they come, it's the moon. It's the way things go. They happen in cycles and patterns, and recognizing those, and even the shadow aspects, which is one of the parts of the self that Jung talks about, and realizing you can't see it, but you know it's there, and it's screwing with you. It's haunting you. It's trying to get you to pull stuff out of it back into the world that you stuffed there for all the wrong reasons. Again, the carpenter who was the doctor, what he did is he joined Rotary and got involved in every carpentry project. So there are.
Well,
go ahead, Marianne.
I was going to say, I love the wave metaphor, and we've used it several times. But it sounds like you're talking about that undertow, and there's always another wave coming. But but for that next wave to come, there is an undertow that you have to kind of get. So.
Well, and most political assholes, what gets them is not the thing itself, but the political backwash. Talk about undertow. I mean, it's you. If you stood in the waves, you know how the wave retreating back into the ocean, how strong that can be. And welcome to life. And I think the three of us, we're trying to just say this is life, and this is what we've discovered so far. It's never stopped being a mystery, and every time I reach for what seems stable and rooted, it shoots to infinity. And we're back at what the fuck. So
yeah, and we've got all these metaphors that guide us through life, whether we're aware of them or not. And we've talked at length about different types of metaphors and how they affect us and how they change the way we think and the way we act. But if you look at the Dharma metaphor as a wave, and you look at that compared to the Taoist metaphor of a stream, the flowing of the stream, encountering obstacles that you have to go around them. You can't knock them aside. And all of these different metaphors have a little kernel to teach us. The idea, back to Jungian psychology, in listening to what our unconscious is trying to communicate to us through dreams, through our every thought, for that matter. And the more these metaphors can be brought into a certain alignment with what we feel is our true purpose, then they can then begin to reinforce that. So we can become that stream that's flowing and not breaking up against an obstacle, but finding ways around it. And coming back to, again, the true nature of us as a unique individual that our unconscious is trying to communicate with all the time throughout our life. And again, it's that balance between the inside and the outside, and the needs of our family and the needs of our self, and all of these things we have to balance as we're moving along this journey, whether it's a wave or a stream or a path, or whatever metaphor works the best, or whatever combination of metaphors works the best. Grab onto them and keep on that journey.
Yeah, I think that's why Jung liked religion. He saw it as a response to the WTFs of the world, just, the best.
But he didn't endorse any particular doctrine.
No, he was a solipsist. Solipsism, in other words, he knew what went in his head was real and true, and he could account for it, except the unconscious pieces, and he even had a place for that to feed him. But he said anything outside yourself, you really can't be sure of it.
Yeah, because you're probably projecting it.
Yeah, which can be a little frightening sometimes.
Especially when you get caught in your own projections. And this is another place to find your Dharma. When you begin seeing what your defense mechanisms are, your projections, your intellectualizations, your denials, all that stuff. And you can look up the defense mechanisms, but each of them are a little flit of understanding of your Dharma and how you sought to defend yourself from something. And what is that thing? Probably it's shadow stuff or stuff from your unconscious that means if you see it and face it, you might have to change. And that is a threat to the self. Or at least people's
threat to the ego.
Yeah, to the
Well,
ego.
yeah, or even just maybe not even change it, but be responsible for it and be responsible for the things that you've done because of it. Yeah.
Well, I've shared with you that I went through a process as a chaplain at St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital called Tavistock, which is a Jungian process, which a lot of these Life Stream and all these other things came from, these confrontational troops. And after 8 weeks of this, we had a debrief. and everybody had to say one thing that they learned, and what I learned was everybody's an asshole. And there were, I think there were 30 of us who were chaplains there, because it was the biggest mental hospital in the United States at the time. And I actually think I stumbled upon a truth. The hard thing is when you take that truth and you look at it in the mirror and you realize you also are an asshole. But where we are an asshole is when we're beginning to understand it and we catch ourselves, is a little flit of our Dharma. It's a little reveal, if you will. And it's these little reveals that, to me, as we begin to pay attention, seem to bring the largest truths. And Marianne, when you talked about being a jumbled mess, there are little truths and little reveals in those jumbledness, if we pay attention, that I have found makes me go, well, son of a bitch, I'll be damned.
Right. There are opportunities for growth, correct?
Yeah, great way of saying it.
Yes. Well, and even the idea that, I don't know that I would use the term that we're all assholes, because to me that has a whole different thing. But
you didn't go through Tavistock with these people.
That's right. I didn't. But we're all flawed, right? And I think that recognizing that we have these flaws, and that and some of them might be lifelong. It may be just too big of an obstacle to change it, but to recognize it and try not to inflict it on others, I think that can be a goal in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, and as you said that, it makes me think as we all want to look into a mirror that reveals the clearest view of who we are. And most of us, when we look in a mirror, they're not smooth. Most of us have been in a fun house and you see these weird mirrors. We end up with a distorted perspective, and hopefully our spiritual journey tries to correct the optics a little bit. But the fact is, our mirror is still distorted. But knowing it's distorted is a higher order of knowledge than perceiving the distortion itself.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Jung talked about complexes, and we all have them. We've all experienced things in growing up and in moving through life that have fed back on ourselves and caused a little eddy in this flow of Dharma. And once we realize that we have those, then we can begin to, when we're angry or when we're acting out or whatever, even if we can't stop that anger, or even if we have done things that we're not pleased with, we can at least say, well, let me take a look at what led me to that. Or let me try and be aware a little bit of why I'm not flowing smoothly. What is the big rock in the stream that I'm encountering that I have to find a way around? And that act is part of, in my opinion, the most important part of everyone's journey, because everyone has those obstacles, those complexes that distort the mirror, if you will. And once we know that we have those, then we can begin to take a look at them and begin to modify them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Marianne. I'm gonna turn it to you, Marianne. But if you would include in your response your final comment on listening to Dharma, because we're
okay.
the fastest half hour of our week.
Well, I was just going to say that the whole idea of when we look in that mirror, we are typically we're our biggest critics, right? And so we are going to look at those things, and if we can love ourselves even in spite of all those things, or that we can be accepting of who we are even with these flaws, because that's part of the human experience. I think it's part of being human. And I just kind of, just to close out, I just wanted to kind of go back to our metaphor of the waves and the oceans and the undertows. And because when I think about that undertow, the strongest undertow creates the biggest waves, right? I mean, think of a tsunami that kind of just pulls the whole ocean out. And then when you think of a stream, you're going down a stream, but then for survival, what about having to go upstream? And so I think if we can arrange our lives so that we can be in that flow, that we can be able to ride those eddies and be aware, see those boulders, and not be afraid of them, but figure out what to do with them. And part of I think part of that comes from self-acceptance, and it kind of goes right back to what we started with. You know, Dharma is figuring out who you are and accepting who you are and living from that place.
Amen. Bob, final comments?
Well, again, I like the idea of listening to our Dharma, of trying to again, in Jungian terms, let our unconscious speak to us and let it try and guide us. And even though we're going to get a distorted view, the more we can open up to the true essence, the center of our self, that true psyche, the true place where we exist as a unique individual, that is as worthwhile as every other unique individual. And that was the thing that Jung really brought that people hadn't brought before. And that was, he was studying people that were very, very sick, but yet he always viewed each one of them as having something worthwhile to say that he could learn from. And I think that to take the attitude that everyone is worthwhile, everyone can connect to their unique purpose, and everyone can learn from that, is an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I'm going to end with a little response, a little story. I know I'm probably going over, but I've shared it before about a rug weaver who designed this great rug and had like 8 or 9 people weaving it because it was so big. And one of the guys realized he'd made a mistake in the rug, and he was very afraid because he didn't want to go to the designer. She was going to get really angry, but he had to do it because it would take days to undo what he had just done, and it would take all the weavers. So he went to the woman who designed it and told her, and she said, and she took out the pad with the design, and she erased a little bit where his mistake and redrew it, and it was more beautiful than before. And I think that we need to remember, when it comes to flaws, that word, mistakes, that evolution's greatest tool is the mistake. If it wasn't for my mistakes, I tell you, I wouldn't be married and happy right now. And you know, with kids and all that stuff, that's for damn sure. It was my mistakes that made me caused me to take a turn. And that's what this next season is about. And what I really want to do is go to this place that I spent years in the great cycle of the Christian year. Because we're entering Advent. And you know, whether you're a believer of a God or of a tradition or a follower or whatever, it doesn't matter, because Advent is saying something to us. There's hope, there's love, there's peace, and there's joy. Those are the 4 elements of Advent. And it's about waking up. It's about being able to be transformed. We've been talking about Jung, you know, if you look at the process of evolution of how he dealt with a patient, the last piece was called transformation. And part of our journey, all of our journeys, is to be transformed, but not to lose a sense of ourself. Just know that it's the self. There is this steady place that hope and love and peace and joy can radiate from. It's not that it doesn't change. It's just that the continuity of the change is so profound that you end up finding yourself rooted in the whole universe, in the human family, the tragedies and the joys. My friends, blessings.